Well, thank you. It's very thoughtful of you.
Y'all are talking to the sun, I know. You're perched.
One of the interviews I did out here, they were like, "Can we get you looking into the sun?" And I was like, "Do we have to?" And she's like, "Could you take your sunglasses off?" I'm like, "No, I'm not taking my sunglasses."
Troy, you okay there? Alright. We're rolling, speed. I just wanted to give you just a different, because now we got a big wide. It's a little nicer.
A little different perspective.
You can even push in if you want, Lance, on that one. I mean, you know, because I've got basically a head to a mid shot. And I'm out of your frame, right?
There you go, right there. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool. Speed.
Okay, go for it.
Okay.
If you want to clap, go for it. Thanks. Cool.
Wait, doing that forever. What were some of the first parks that you developed? Do you recall the names?
Well, the riverfront park was one. We also put one, did one in East Tampa, which was it was a open space grant. But the community, we built a lot of parks, did a lot of improvements through the community development block grant, and being a planner, basically, then I would not only plan it, but I would also take charge of seeing that park got completed. The riverfront park was probably one of the largest ones that we did. That was finished in 1976, and that's where we went to New York City and visited with the people up there. We took a county commissioner, Joe Chalura, with us. We took Dr. Lou Bowers from University of South Florida with us, and we're so impressed with Richard Datner, the designer of these parks, that we actually hired him to do a master plan for the riverfront park. And we were so impressed with that we actually hired him then to do the final plans for the park. And that was finished, of course, in 1976.
How did the concept for Perry Harvey Sr. Park come about?
Well, first off, the urban renewal cleared out the area, and then it was sort of dumped on to my lap to lay it out, basically. And so I knew I wanted to include a water play area. I knew that we wanted to have a skateboard bowl. The basketball courts and so forth are all part of it. It's basically a linear park and a buffer between this Orange Avenue here and the Housing Authority. And then we hired a company called Post Jernigan, Post Shoe. I'm trying to remember exactly. It's been a long time. Post Buckley, Shoe, and Jernigan. Okay, and they kind of finished out. They did the detailing of it, and I did the basic, the conceptual plans for it.
So the skateboard bowl was part of the initial design as you began?
Yeah. The design of the skateboard bowl, it started with my concept from Sulphur Springs and seeing the kids go down that parking lot slope. But I also had seen and read about people using swimming pools as a skateboard bowl, and I thought that was kind of neat. So what I did is I tried to combine two concepts. One is putting a bowl down at the bottom that is a little bit like a swimming pool bowl, and then a slope going to it that would kind of represent the hill like I saw in Sulphur Springs, and to try to tie those two things together. I'm not a designer of swimming pools, so what I did is I sought out a company here in town called Lang Pool Company, and I worked with them, and they knew about putting a pool together, what it's going to take, the reinforcing concrete and all of that. And they came up with a couple of different designs, and we played with it until we came up with this basic design. And then what I did with that is I turned it over to Post Buckley and Jernigan and Shoe, and let them kind of add it to the rest of the park that they were designing. And then I left just before construction started, actual construction. It was in 1977.
How did you come up with the concept for the bumps or the moguls, as we call them, in the bowl?
You want to know the truth about it?
Yes, sir.
It was dumb luck. I mean, we just said, well, you know, I didn't have anything to copy, This was something very new. I knew I had a rough idea of what we wanted to do, but it just seemed like the thing to do at the time.
Yeah, just made it more interesting, more from the adventure playground theme.
Yeah, yeah.
What was the Perry Harvey Park modeled after, if anything in particular?
Well, there were a lot of linear parks. This is nothing terribly radical about the park in general. It's whenever you do a park, you lay out your objectives, and then you try to follow those objectives through. And I'm very, very objective-oriented person from my planning background, my engineering, pre-engineering kind of background. You start with some objectives, and this park had several. One was to provide a place for all the people that live in the housing authority project here, and also provide some sort of visual. When you come into the city, it's a gateway kind of area. It's a linear area, and it's a bit of a buffer because you have a major road here from the people that were living here. So it had a lot of different functions or objectives that we were trying to achieve.
Is the buffer, as you speak of, is that why you included all of the berms and the raised elevations throughout the park?
That's a big part of it. The trees is another big part of it.
Okay, do you know if there were any other names considered for Perry Harvey Park before it was dedicated in honor of him?
I do not know. Originally, it was called the. Trying to remember what we called it at the very, very beginning. I don't remember exactly. Central Park Village Park, I think it was what it started off being, because again, Central Park Village is right there.
Yeah.
But then shortly after that, they came up with the name, and I didn't have anything to do with that. The City Council is the one that's really responsible for signing names. Mm-hmm. I can make a recommendation, but they're the ones that are the last word in that sort of thing.
According to my records and the research that I've done, I guess it was in 1979 that Mayor Poe nominated to City Council that it be named in honor of Mr. Harvey.
Yeah.
So, I guess that's just a bit of a trivia there. But what year did the actual design process of Perry Harvey Skateboard Park begin?
Probably about the design for the park probably started somewhere about 1975. For a while, for a good long while, after demolition, it was nothing but weeds. And there was some indecision about the money and so forth. And finally, when we got the go-ahead, then we started working on the design.
Okay, I know you've made mention of Richard Datner and his involvement with Riverfront Park. To what degree, if any, was he involved, or did he inspire? I'll just start over. I know earlier you mentioned Richard Datner and his involvement with Riverfront Park. To what degree was he involved with the creation of Perry Harvey Sr. Park, or what inspiration did he offer as to its design?
Well, he was not involved in the park directly. Only indirectly, and only because of my involvement in going to New York City and visiting those parks. I took a lot of pictures when I was in New York, and when I came back, I shared a lot of that information with the engineering company that we hired, and they did the final detailing of the water play area, and they were really, honestly, more hands-on with the water play area than I was, whereas with the skateboard bowl, I was more hands-on and giving them more of a detail of what I had in mind.
So there was more of a connection between Datner design.
Hey Shannon, let's just clap one more time. Sorry. And hang on a moment. Speed. Thanks.
So basically, the connection of Datner to the park would mostly lie on the brick structure and the fountain, and your experiences and the information you gathered from visiting the adventure playgrounds in New York at the time?
We went to several different playgrounds in New York City, and I had a really good feel for the type of areas, and I shared photographs and so forth with the engineering company. But as I said before, I was not hands-on as far as the actual laying out of the water play area, whereas with the skateboard bowl, I was far more hands-on.
So this basically the skateboard bowl was your baby, or your almost like your pet project,
Yeah, you can say
for
that.
lack of a better term?
You can say that. Yeah, I really felt in many ways that had I not built it here, I'd build it someplace else. But this was an opportunity, and a good opportunity, partly because we had a lot of meetings here with the citizens as we were designing the park. And I heard a lot of people expressing interest in various things. And the Skateboard Bowl, I was convinced, would serve the community very well, and at the same time be something that would be relatively durable, as it has been all these years, and something that would not be real expensive to maintain. I mean, there's been some maintenance involved in it, but I was convinced that it would work and it would serve the community well.
I know you mentioned with me before that one desire of the residents of Central Park Village was a swimming pool. Do you remember anything specifically that they requested as the creation of the park began?
Well, they want a swimming pool, and as a park planner, I have to take a lot of things into consideration. And normally for a swimming pool to be functional, it needs to be a certain size and a certain capacity, and that size and capacity would have served the community much more wider and larger than was here. What we had was a very concentrated population here, but it wasn't much beyond that. So the reality is, and I have to be very hard and cold when you look at those realities, if we had put a pool here, it would have been underutilized because there simply was not sufficient numbers to merit that. And then when you build a pool, the city, it was the most expensive type of facility to operate of all the recreation facilities in the entire city. And I knew the numbers, and I knew that it was going to be very difficult. And the swimming section also knew the numbers, and they were very concerned about it as well. And the last thing I wanted to do is to build something that over the years would become a problem for the city, and I couldn't afford to do that. Whereas a skateboard bowl, I thought would have a lot more functionality. It would be used all the year round as opposed to just in the summertime. It would get a lot of use and enjoyment, and a very durable, low-cost type of facility. And that's why we opted for this.
Nice. Some few of these questions you've already covered, so I'm going to skip over them, but is there anything about the bowl as built that differs from your original concept or design, or the early perhaps sketches or preliminary designs that were in your head?
It's been a long time and my memory is not perfect. There may have been some slight alterations of some of those bumps over there, but I can't be for sure because I just do not remember all the details, and that's a fine detail about exactly how those bumps took place, and so I can't say for sure.
Yeah, it's not very understandable. How did the city feel about the concept of a skateboard bowl? As you began proposing it to the city council?
Well, there was some concern, and I remember some of the people that I worked with expressing concern about it creating a liability problem, and it started to worry me a little bit. And then when I left the city and came back 10 years later, well, actually, during the time I was away, I was not far away. I drove by because my office was downtown here, and I was just blown away with all the cars here all the time. And so one of the first things I did when I came back to the City of Tampa, I checked with the claims department, the safety department, and I asked them, I said, well, what about the injuries and so forth? And they told me that in the last year, they hadn't had any injuries reported. They didn't pay out any claims. And they told me that the only problem they had for police coming out here was fights about the use of the bowl and people fighting over it and not getting injured by it, which was, I was thrilled. I can't tell you how relieved I was that, because I do remember a lot of concerns You know, especially after after you get the ball rolling and things start to happen, and then you start hearing people saying, whoa, you know, this could be a problem. And then I begin to worry. I never want to create. One of the things I never want to do is to create a legacy of having created something that didn't work out. And that weighs heavily on me. I want to be responsible. I tend to be, maybe to a fault, but I do want to be a responsible person. But this, I think, worked out okay.
How did you, I mean, I know with these doubts, how did you ultimately sell the city on the concept of building a skateboard bowl at a time when skateboarding was in such an early stage in its infancy?
Maybe that's why. Maybe because it was in its early in this infancy, that people weren't questioning me as much perhaps as they could on the one hand. On the other hand, being the recreation planner for the city, being in charge of the funding through the Community Development Block Grant, being responsible for that funding gave me a little bit of a leverage. And so I was able to pull it off. And you know, had I had to go out and try to raise the capital or something, it would have been a different story maybe. But having the funding behind me and being responsible for that, being the recreation planner, I was able to pull it off.
Thank you. Let's see here. How did the residents of Central Park Village feel about, you know, all the different aspects and, you know, designs within the park, you know, like the fountain, the skateboard bowl, and all the other amenities that were included? Do you remember any feedback from that, you know, or how it was received?
I do remember the meetings. In fact, there was a fella at the University of South Florida that actually did some filming of some of those meetings. He worked with Lou Bowers, Dr. Lou Bowers. His name is eluding me at the moment, but you have to understand that a lot of the people coming to those meetings had a lot of issues with different kinds of things, and it wasn't like, oh, that's perfect, that's what I want. You'd hear a lot of pros, a lot of cons, and a lot of stuff that was completely off the wall. I mean, they had a lot of other issues. For example, probably the most common thing to come up in those meetings were things where they wanted to try to see if there were jobs available to them through something here, like maybe something where they could actually be hired. And I had no responsibility for that. But that was of interest to them because they were struggling, they were low income, they were wanting, to them, the most important thing I could give them was a job, and I didn't have that to offer them. So it was not a nice, clean, easy thing in that way. There were a lot of things to work through, and but we did the best we could.
Were you ever met with any resentment, you know, from the area of you know, the demolition of Central Avenue and it being replaced by this park, or was there any sort of gratitude? You know, which position was more common?
The actual demolition was not through. I had nothing to do with that. That was through the urban renewal group of people, and if there was maybe they might have gotten some flack. I don't know. All I know is that I was given this tract of land and said, here it is.
Okay. So Dave, was it ever, you know, I can go on later to talk about this, what was, you know, did any of the residents, like, you know, parents or anything, you know, you remember anything from the time when it was constructed that it was seen as a positive change in the city?
No, because when I left the city to go to the county, this was still weeds. And a lot of people didn't really understand what was going on, I'll be honest with you. So I really I wasn't involved in that at all.
Let's see, do you remember any delays? You know, you spoke about, you know, you're saying now it was weeds. Do you remember the delays and what caused them, you know, at the time when they were trying to start construction?
It's just funding. Because the thing is that the funding comes in an annual block grant, and you had to wait until the funding was available. You know, it doesn't come all at one time. And it was the same way when I went to the county. You have what they call fiscal years, and funding is scheduled in each of these fiscal years, and you have to kind of wait your turn. I couldn't even start the design of a project until I have a budget, and the budget may not be for another year or 2 years down the road, so I've got to wait to start the design, and then I have to wait until the design is complete before you start construction. So it's something that you have to be patient for, you have to be prepared for it, and you have to move when you have the resources. You can't move before that time, and that's kind of a constraint that you have to live with.
Yeah, a matter of logistics. I know you mentioned a few people. Do you remember any of the city officials, you know, who you worked with directly with the design of the park?
Well,
it's hard to come up with names.
Yeah, of course, Joe Chalura and I went to New York together, and that had some influence. There were no buildings here. Joe Chalura is an architect. He has designed a lot of buildings around, but he wasn't involved at all in this project. I do remember that we had a series at about that time where we had a series of different mayors. And what happened was Greco resigned from being the mayor. And I don't recall exactly what year, but it was just prior to this time. And then we had Cheney came in, he was the head of the city council. He became acting mayor, and then he died of a heart attack. And then Ed Copeland came in, who was another council member, became mayor, and then Bill Poe was elected, and then I worked with Bill Poe. When I left the city, I was working with Bill Poe. So we had a series of mayors in a very short period of time. So it wasn't that I had worked with any one of them all that detailed. I did a lot of stuff with Mayor Poe. And not only was I doing this park, but I was also doing about 30 other parks at the same time. Now upgrading, mostly upgrading. And there were a lot of things that we started to do. For example, and I hope I don't take too long to go into this, but when I first became park planner, most of the parks in the city did not have parking lots or any kind of way that would keep cars out of them. And here you have children running around in a park, and you have cars driving around on the grass, parking under the trees. I actually had pictures of people waxing their cars in picnic shelters. I had pictures that I went and I showed to Mayor Poe, and I told him, I said, this is a bad thing. All these cars are driving around. The police department, you go almost anywhere and see police doing paperwork under the shade of trees in parks, leaving ruts and everything. I said, we've got to change. So one of the things I suggested was that we declare our parks no vehicular area, we provide parking, and then we block the cars from getting in to the park itself. And so we started a program using the federal money that I had for park improvements. So every park we would go to, we would start making it vehicular exclusive. In other words, no cars at all in the park, within the park, but also providing a parking area, because we knew that we had to have some place for the people to park. And what I started to do was I made up a list of all the different kinds of things that a park should be. And Mayor Poe bought off on that. One was we needed more tree planting, landscaping. We needed to have better buildings that were safer and more functional, better lighting, more informational signs and so forth. There was a whole list of things that we tried to do, and providing the vehicular barriers was one of those things. So we would go to each park and make sure that it came up to that what we call minimum standard. And this park was one of the ones that was included in that, and when we designed it. We provided the parking lots, we provided the lighting, we provided the landscaping, we provided the barriers to keep cars from coming into it, right along with the others. And we tried to make it as nice as we could as far as an open green space, and one that was not only just open and green, but also functional for the neighborhood and the community. And that's kind of what we were trying to do here.
It's a great concept. Let's see, we'll go through here. Did any other cities, throughout the country express an interest in the Skateboard Bowl after it was built?
Well, when I came back to the city, this was 10 years later, And my office with the Parks Department, I started getting phone calls and letters from people, park directors from other places, for example, or county commissioners or whatever, and they wanted a set of the plans. And I was kind of baffled at first. So what I did was I made up a stack of plans, printed them up, and then my assistant would routinely mail them out as we would get requests. And it was just amazing to me, all the people from various places. I mean, some place, I remember one place in Washington State wanted a copy of them. And I thought it was a real compliment, because what they would do is they'd come to Tampa to visit, or they'd come here for a conference or something. They'd see this and they'd say, well, that's a great idea. And then they would contact us. And I was flattered by it.
Are you aware of any of those cities that requested the plans ever constructing anything that resembled the bowl?
No, I didn't follow up on any of that. I never kept a list of all the people. That's been a long time. I've been away from the city now since 1993.
Okay, you know, spoke a lot about this. What were some of the biggest challenges that the city faced, particularly with Perry Harvey, with the water fountain and the tot splash area and the bowl? What were some of the recurring issues that you were met with when you came back as a parks maintenance supervisor?
I was the manager for park maintenance for 5 years with the city. And at that time, I was responsible for all of the city parks, all of the playgrounds, all of the ball fields, all of the alleyways and vacant lots, all of the community center custodians. I had 250 people in my section. It was a massive job. Here was a little bit difficult because we had a lot of vandalism here. We had a lot of problems with trash. And it was a little disheartening. I mean, this happens. It happens. It's something you learn to live with. When you work so hard to try to provide something to the community, and then you go there and you see sometimes how they treat it, it's a little bit of a downer. But I remember we had problems with trash, garbage, and candy wrappers and fast food containers and all that down inside the bowl. The water play area was especially bad. And it was a little difficult, and we had to struggle with that. We had to continually work to see if we could overcome that. But that's true of a lot of the playgrounds that we have, and it's something you just have to learn to live with. And we also had some problems with the building down here. We had kids climbing to the top of it and running around on the roof, and that was a worrisome. So we changed the roof design on that. But that's all part of what you sign up for when you're in the Parks Department.
Yeah, is that why they basically connected the two recreation buildings?
Exactly, exactly. Before it was a structure of pipes, and that just kids love to play on it.
Yeah. I know you said you left in '93, so you probably don't have much recollection of what led to the elimination of the brick pyramid water fountain structure. I guess that happened,
all after I was left. All after I left.
Could you tell us about some of the other parks and projects you've designed and helped to construct, in your career?
Well, when I left the city of Tampa, I went to work for Hillsborough County, and the voters of Hillsborough County in 1977 passed a referendum for a bond issue for $10 million. And that was to build several new parks, actually 4, and upgrade 2 other parks. And so I was responsible for getting those parks built. It was Alderman's Ford, Lettuce Lake, Upper Tampa Bay. E.G. Simmons was an upgrade. Edward Medard Park was an upgrade, and then a new park at Eureka Springs. And so I had to, I hired an assistant, an architect who happened to be my assistant when I built this. I hired him away from the city, and named Sullen Stewart. And we set about to design, get these designed and built. And it was a massive job, I'll tell you the honest truth. I worked my buns off. But we got those 6 parks done and finished by the time the bond program was over, the 6 years. And in 1983, we were done. And at that time, since my job was tied to the bond program, I was hired under the bond program, I didn't have a job, and the city offered me a position in the parks department instead of the planning department, and I took it. And that's why I came back to the city for 10 years. And then after 10 years, the city, or I mean, the county rather, had a second bond issue, this time for $20 million, and they wanted to build 63 parks. Half of them would be recreation facilities, and half of them would be athletic facilities. So they insisted that I come to work for them, and I put them off for about 6 weeks because I knew my tenure was 10 years, otherwise I wasn't vested. So I said, I can't leave, so they waited for me, and I went to the county, and then I had a staff ultimately of 11 people, and we designed and built those other parks. So there were a lot of parks. Almost every park in the county up until the time I left, which is 2006, I had some involvement in, one way or another. And I tried to standardize a lot of things in the parks. A lot of the features, a lot of the park equipment was standardized. We put things on a rotational basis. In other words, the playground equipment was set up so that after so many years it would be replaced. Playground equipment's a little bit like tires on a car. It doesn't last forever. It needs to be replaced every now and then. So there were a lot of things that I worked on, bringing the buildings up to a minimum standard, bringing the playgrounds up to minimum standard, trying to make that park system the very best that we could. And one of the things, for example, was the Edrata Sports Complex. Up until that time, when people would go to for a ball game, they would go to any of a number of different neighborhood playgrounds for baseball games and softball games. And it created a lot of problems because that was a very inefficient way of doing things. I wanted to centralize things together so we could have a lot of ball fields in one place, could better maintain everything in one place, have a dedicated staff that would maintain the area, and people could go there with much better facilities. So we created the Edrata Sports Complex as a demonstration as to what can be done when you do that kind of thing. We built 19 ball fields there.
Where is this at?
It's off of Racetrack Road near South Mobley Road. It's 136 acres, and we built 19 ball fields there. And we have soccer, baseball, and softball. And when we finished that, everyone was so impressed with how that operated that now they decided, the Board of County Commission decided that they wanted us to look very carefully at other areas and to start building that kind of complex in the other corners of the county because it was so successful. But that's an example of not just recreation planning, but also good business sense to put the operation as efficient as you can be. And ultimately, you benefit the community because you're saving money and you can do other things with that money. So it's not as simple as just building something. You have to think of all these things and take all these things into consideration.
That's excellent. You know, speaking about how your efficiency and improvement to your things and the maintenance of parks. During your second stretch with the city, what were some of the improvements that you made to the original structure of the skateboard bowl?
I wasn't here.
You weren't here for
the
92 or whatever?
No,
the sidewalk and everything?
Okay, okay. I thought you meant right after it was built. No, when I came back, one of the things we did, we had an erosion problem because the grass was worn out around the rim. Mm-hmm. And it was causing erosion. So the natural thing to do would be to build a sidewalk around the rim down there so that it would be a little bit more durable, not have washouts along the edge. Because once those washouts start, it could cause cracks and so forth in it.
Underneath the structure.
Yeah.
So, were there any other, I've seen some of the correspondence from when you were addressing these issues from my research at the city. I saw one thing that proposed like a design of steps coming up with berm. Do you remember anything about that?
I don't recall specifically, no. I'm sorry.
That's cool.
There are just so many things going on.
Yeah, that's why these guys, people like me ask questions and we want all the details, but you've got way more information than I could ever imagine, so don't feel bad. Reflecting back, of your whole career, do you feel that you made a difference by creating the things that you did, and why?
I'd like to think I created a big difference. It was, to me, my work honestly was a mission. I really felt very dedicated to it, and it wasn't about me, okay? That's an important consideration here. It's not about me. It's about the residents of the community and the community itself benefiting and getting the most out of their taxpayer money, and that to me is important. And if I can save money and make things more efficient, or I can build something better or longer lasting or whatever, I'm all for it. And that to me is my legacy. I want to have a positive influence, and I'm not worried about getting the credit. And in fact, a lot of my friends, don't even know that I've built some of these parks and everything. It's something I don't walk around, carrying it on my shoulder or anything, whatever. I don't do that.
Badge of honor.
No, I don't worry about it.
What are some of the things that you're currently involved with or interested in?
Well, I've always been interested in the Native Plant Society. I've been able, now that I have time and I'm retired, I'm really enjoying retirement. I'm a member of the Audubon Society. I go regular kayaking. I do a lot of biking, bicycling through the neighborhood. Not high-speed stuff, but stuff that suits a 71-year-old. And I enjoy that, and I think it's very important to take care of oneself. I have two recently born grandchildren. My wife and I have always wanted grandchildren. Now I'm 71 years old. I've got a 9-month-old, a 19-month-old, and a 6-year-old. And I think they're wonderful. The trouble is, one lives in Chicago and two live in Virginia, so we don't see them very often. But that's kind of where I'm at now, and I really enjoy that.
That's awesome. More recent topic here, what's your opinion of the nomination of the Bro Bowl to the National Register of Historic Places?
Well, I was amazed, and to be very honest with you, I have to be honest if I say this. I hope you don't take it wrong, but if somebody had asked me, well, what's your give me 30 parks that you worked on the last 30 years, I probably would have forgotten this one. I mean, it was something I did, and then I moved on, and I didn't think a whole lot more after it. But when I heard about the nomination, there were several things that went through my mind. One is that these guys are really diligent. I mean, these are serious guys. I mean, they must be really into this, and they must really enjoy this and feel a certain ownership of it. And I think that's wonderful, because the fact that it's become what it is, the notoriety it's received, is not anything to do with me. It's due to you and the users of it. And I think that's terrific, and that's the way it ought to be.
Sir, a few more questions, and I'll take a little more time. Does knowing that so many people have enjoyed the Bro Bowl for the past 35 years spark any sort of emotion for you?
Yeah. That's what it's all about. I mean, that's what I struggle to try to do, is to make something that will be appreciated. And when I build a park like Lettuce Lake or Alderman's Ford, I'm thinking about taking care of the environment through environmental education. There are reasons you do these things. When we build athletic complexes, the whole idea of athletics and youth sports and learning the skills and the citizenship and all of that goes into that sort of thing. That's what it's all about. I mean, it's exciting to know you've done something that's well received, that's being utilized and not just wasted. I mean, I've done things that didn't work out. I've done some things that as this that worked out well, and that's what I struggle to do. one of the things I didn't mention, but when I was at the end of the bond program, the first bond, the $10 million bond program that we had, there was some land, the Cockroach Islands, and also some land on what's called the Bower Tract, 1,650 acres of it, south of Hillsborough Avenue, out toward Double Branch, from Double Branch Creek this way, that were great environmental lands, and I would have loved to have bought those lands under the bond program that we had. The trouble was, I didn't have enough money to buy those properties. So I applied to the state for a grant through the Conservation, Recreation, and Lands Program, and I took people from here, various scientists, environmental scientists and so forth, with me to Tallahassee, just like you took this project, and I convinced them that this was good, a worthy thing, and they approved grants for both of those parks, or parcels. The problem was that it was a matching thing, and I didn't have enough money to match those grants. So I ran out of time. I had to leave the city. I had to leave the county because my bond program was over, and I had to come back to the city. And about a little less than a year after I was back at the City of Tampa, I got a phone call from Ed Radis, the director from Hillsborough County, and he said that he had been talking with Commissioner Jan Platt, and that she had suggested that maybe we could raise some money in order to buy these properties if we put a bond program together. So I said, well, I can do that. So I pulled together a committee, an advisory committee that I had when we built Upper Tampa Bay Park, and we drafted out some guidelines. And I was also very experienced with the land and water conservation funds and grants that were federal grants through the Department of the Interior. I was very familiar with the guidelines. So I drafted these guidelines for us to put on the ballot a land buying program. The voters of the county approved that, and we called it the ELAP program. Now, they approved $25 million. About 2 or 3 years later, they approved another. It was so successful that they approved another $100 million for a total of $125 million. And to date, that program has purchased over 50,000 acres of land for preservation in Hillsborough County. And to me, you know, that's what it's about. That's a little bit of leadership. A little bit of leadership goes a long way if you do it, you know, if you're lucky and you can do it right. There's always a risk in not working out. But that's the kind of thing that is important to me, seeing that, because that's going to mean land that's going to be preserved for future generations. And it's not just about next week or next month or next year. It's about what is it going to be 30 years from now? What is it going to be 50 years from now? What is it going to be 35 years from now? Okay, back then. Okay, that's what it's all about. Future generations, leaving something for them, thinking about them and the future. That's so important, and that's kind of where I'm coming from.
So you'd say that, you know, it's more in the best interest of humanity, society, culture, etc., to provide for the future, or as important to provide the future as it is also to reflect on the history in the past?
Absolutely. The fact is that it's not about me, it's not about us, it's about others. I always believe very strongly in other people and helping them, and not only others, but future generations. Very concerned, very dedicated to that, and I can't stress that enough. To me, that's for the bottom line.
Just to throw this out there, it's kind of an impromptu question. I'll get prepared for one more here and we'll wrap it up. But with relation to history, you know, we're talking about history and future. What do you think the bowl, you know, offers as far as like a historical example or a reference point for future generations? You know, that it was so innovative for its time and such a unique design. You know, what do you think its value is from a historical standpoint?
It's been said, and I forget the lady that actually said it, but her point was that growing up as a young person, you learn a lot, but it's better to break a leg than it is to break a spirit. And a lot of times, children as they're growing up are constantly faced with the lack of this, or they can't do that, they can't experience something exciting or maybe just a little bit risky. And this is an effort to try to balance that out with having something that provides that experience. And even though a person may skin a knee, they're going to be better off for the enjoyment and the excitement and the pleasure and the skills they learn in doing it. And that's a very important concept to keep in mind.
I know you're a very humble man, and you know, I admire that in you. It's something I strive for. But my question is, have you ever been recognized, you know, in any form or way for, you know, your contributions, you know, to the parks of the city?
Well, you know, I can tell you that I have gone to park ribbon cuttings and dedications where I have sat there or stood there and heard the mayor or the county commissioners or the city council people or the civic leaders shake each other's hand and how great they are and all, and never been mentioned. Okay, I've been there. Several times I've been there. Okay, I understand what it's like. But again, I don't worry about it because they hired me. They hired me to do a job. And I've heard people say, well, of course you don't get recognition. It's your job. You know, well, okay. You know, but I really feel that I want to do, it's never been a job to me. It's something that I am very grateful for the community leaders and the politicians and the mayors and the county administrators and the city council people that have allowed me to go out and do this. I mean, they provided me resources, money and bond issues and grants and so forth. And I feel a serious responsibility to make the most of those things. I mean, when I was building the parks with the first batch of parks with a $10 million bond issue, I pulled into this county $2.8 million in grants with only $10 million in a bond issue that we had. I mean, that's what it's about. It's making the most of it and being grateful for it. I am so blessed, I can't tell you, to have had the opportunity to do all these things and have the support of saying, here's the funds, go do it. It's incredible. I mean, to me, it's just unreal. It's unreal. And I want to make the best of it. I feel like responsibility because they've had faith in me to do these things, and I want to do a good job.
It's another impromptu question. Sorry, just, you know, as we start conversating, these ideas are going through my mind, and I just can't help but wonder, you know, your view on some of these questions is, you know, as the redevelopment of Perry Harvey Sr. Park, you know, is now shaping up, taking place. How do you feel that, you know, what you created can be used or included in the creation of what some see as a rebirth of Perry Harvey Sr. Park?
Well, first off, I don't want anyone to think that I have a vested interest just because I created it or had something to do with its creation. If the powers that be, and I have to recognize that I'm retired now. I'm just another resident, and if the city council or whatever they want to do, the mayor, whatever, it's their time now, and so I have to bow out, and it doesn't matter that I have any interest in it, really.
Yeah. Just, I mean, from a, you know, like with me, one of the things I love most about this park is the trees, the landscaping, the berms, the shape of it. And I know that a lot of the structures have been eliminated, and, you know, the bowl's in question. And, you know, I'm not really looking for, you know, you to take a stand or a position on that, because it's, you know, neither here nor there. But, you know, like, ultimately, like, I guess where I'm going with this is, you know, would you like to see, you know, some of the terrain or, you know, the actual topography retained in the park? When I go to parks, no matter which park, I always see things that I would like to see a little differently.
but I can't be a micromanager either.
Yeah.
I've got to tell myself, I've had my go at it. Now I pass on the baton to others. I would like to sometimes offer my suggestions or advice, but that's the way life is. I mean, you just have to move on, and there are others that will. I mean, that's what I did when I was coming up. I spread my wings. I learned. I asked questions. I tried to learn the very much. And you know, the funny thing is now that I tried to learn from people and ask their advice, and I was not I don't consider myself an expert at any one thing. I'm more of a generalist, but I do consider myself a person that does manage well the resources, and I try to make the most of them. And I don't have all these little idiosyncrasies that I try to live up to or follow or whatever, preconceived ideas about things or anything. I try to be very objective, very open. And when I'm building a park or designing a park, I do what I call work in the sunshine, let everybody know what you're doing. If they have criticisms, I want to hear about it now. I don't want to wait till it's all done and then hear their criticisms. I want to hear it now. I want to hear before we go this far. I may agree with them, but then again, I may not agree with them. But that's part of what I have to do. And if I make a decision to go with something, even though somebody has said they think it's a bad idea, then that's something that I've got to do. And because somebody has got to be the referee here. Somebody's got to be the decision maker. And if I'm the one in the position to make that decision, then I got to make the decision and move on with it.
So you say you think it would be, you know, in everyone's best interest that all opinions are heard and considered, you know,
absolutely,
in the concept stages.
Absolutely.
Rather than criticisms, you know, post haste after construction's completed.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that will. When I go to meetings and I go to hearings, there are a lot of people that will sit there quietly, not say a word, and then after you started construction or after you finish, they come along and say, you know, you never should have done it that way. And I'm saying, no, that's not the way the game is played. If you want to make a suggestion, you make it before. Sorry, it's too late now. This is the way it is, okay? But I tell them at the hearing, at the public hearing or the meeting or whatever, I tell them right up front, I don't want to hear about it later. That's not the way the game is played. That's against the rules. The rules are, let's hear it now. Let's give it a thought. We either agree with it or disagree with it, but we hear it now, not later. Doesn't work. And that's been one of the ways I've tried to operate in building parks.
That's an excellent approach. Is there anything else, you know, or anything more you wish you could have accomplished, or, you know, anything you still have your sights on?
Well, I've always felt that the environment is very important, and especially global warming is a major issue to me. It's a major worry to me. Environmentalism is very important to me. I was the chairman of the advisory committee of the University of South Florida's Botanical Garden for a number of years. I was on the Green Industry Advisory Committee with SwiftMud for a number of years. But what I would love to do is to try to have some kind of education center or a botanical garden or something somewhere, and actually associated with Mosey would be a wonderful place. In the back there's 40 acres of county land for an education center, kind of like a cross between an environmental education center and a botanical garden, where you could teach the benefits of things that would benefit, like preservation of native plants, for example. If you like animals, birds, or whatever, then you got to have plants. If you like butterflies, you got to have plants. In other words, I find that most people that come to Florida are very naive on the environment that we have here, the type of soils we have here, the type of vegetation we have here. They don't appreciate it. They don't understand it. What we need is to have some place and we have places for the young kids that go, like Nature's Classroom. But these are kids. It's the parents, it's the adults that don't understand the type of things that we need to do here to take better care of our local environment for future generations, for global warming's sake. There are all kinds of things that we need to do to appreciate plants for shading and energy conservation and wind resistance and hurricanes and things of that sort. We need to have some place like that. And I've worked with Mosey. We found the 40 acres there. But in this environment, in this day and time, finding the money to fund something like that is very difficult, if not impossible. And as I look back on my career, that's one of the things that I was never able to achieve. When I was a chairman at the University of South Florida Botanical Garden, I wanted to try to make it work there. It just couldn't happen. We didn't have the resources. The university only has like 6 acres there. It's not enough to do anything with. The University of South Florida's Botanical Garden does not get any money from the university. It's all they have to raise all the funds themselves through plant sales and things of that sort. It's a shame, and I just wish that I could have somehow been able to pull that one off. And I hope maybe in the back of my mind, if I don't go senile in the meantime, that I can pull that off somehow or other, that somebody can pull it off.
It's a very interesting legacy, and I think that's something most like you say is nowadays, especially with the climate.
Again, it's not for me. It's not my legacy. It's something that future generations would benefit from.
A generation or a cultural legacy. Sometimes you have to be the catalyst to just introduce these things, to be the spark.
The spark. If I can be the spark, I'll be the spark.
There you go. You've definitely been one for our city. All right. In closing, is there anything that's been left out, or anything else you'd like to share with us?
I can't think of a thing, honestly.
All right. Just want to thank you so much for sharing everything with us.
Thank you.
For years I've wanted to meet you. I've read about you in the articles in the newspaper and things, and you've always been this mysterious guy, and enjoying the bowl for as long as I have, and how unique it is. I always wanted to know the story of it, and the more I learn about you and your contributions with all the parks and things, and I'm just so impressed with your humility, and that's that just speaks volumes for me, because that's totally
Wow, that was perfect timing.
that's something I just pride myself in. It's a lot of things that would, the preservation effort, people are like quick to put me on in a position or something. I'm like, in the end, I really don't care if my name is mentioned. It's all about, like you said, it's their bowl. It's the kids who enjoy it, and it's our city. That's my take on it. It's just a matter I'm the guy, like you were the guy here at the right place, the right time to create all these things, and I just happen to have the opportunity to hopefully have a voice in preserving this, and something that can't look back on.
Well, I'm very impressed with you. I really am.
Likewise, sir. It's one of the greatest compliments I could receive. I appreciate you taking this time here, being so gracious to indulge me in 40 questions plus.
I'm glad I could help.
I'm glad that this is going to be documented for other people to look back at, so they'll have the understanding of,